The Great Hall of the Galactic Council was the largest room Daniel Carter had ever seen. Crystal pillars rose toward a ceiling so high that clouds sometimes formed beneath it. 12 species sat in their designated areas, each one representing billions of lives across hundreds of worlds, and today, every single one of them was looking at him. Daniel stood at the central podium, wearing the dark blue uniform of a human ambassador. He had served in this role for 15 years. Before that, he had been a soldier. Before that, a teacher. He was 63 years old, and he had given most of his life to building bridges between humanity and the stars. Now, those bridges were burning. "The vote is complete," announced Arbiter Vorendal, a tall creature with silver skin and 4 arms. His voice echoed through the chamber without any need for amplification. 11 species have voted in favor of the Human Containment Act. 1 species has abstained. The motion passes. Daniel felt the words hit him like physical blows, but he did not let his face show it. He had learned long ago that aliens watched human expressions very carefully. They found humans difficult to read, and that made them nervous. The Human Containment Act, such a clean name for such an ugly thing. Under its terms, humanity would be forbidden from expanding beyond their current territory. Their military fleet would be cut in half. Every human colonist would be required to undergo psychological evaluation by council-approved doctors. Human ships would need special permits to travel through council space. The reasoning was simple. Humans were dangerous. Humans were aggressive. Humans were too emotional, too unpredictable, too willing to use violence. The galaxy would be safer if humans were controlled. Daniel looked around the chamber at the species who had just voted to cage his people. There were the Velnoxi, insect-like beings with beautiful wings that shimmered in the light. 20 years ago, an asteroid the size of a small moon had been heading straight for their homeworld. Human ships had intercepted it. Human engineers had designed the explosives that broke it apart. 300 human soldiers had died in that operation when their vessel was struck by debris. There were the Krethar, massive creatures that looked like bears made of stone. 50 years ago, a plague had swept through their colonies, killing millions. Human doctors had worked for 3 years to develop a cure. Dr. Helen Morris had died from the disease herself, infected while treating patients who would not let her touch them without protective suits because they found human skin disgusting. There were the Sandori, elegant beings with long necks and golden eyes. 30 years ago, their civilization had been tearing itself apart in civil war. Human diplomats had negotiated peace. Human peacekeepers had enforced it. Captain William Price had taken a bullet meant for the Sandori Prime Minister and spent the rest of his life in a wheelchair. Every species in this room had a story like that. Every single one had been saved by humans at some point. And every single one had just voted to treat humanity like a dangerous animal that needed to be locked in a cage. Arbiter Vorendal turned his silver face toward Daniel. "Ambassador Carter, you may now make your final statement before the act takes effect." The chamber fell silent. Daniel knew that billions of beings across the galaxy were watching this moment. Human news networks were broadcasting it live. Families were gathered around screens, waiting to hear what their ambassador would say. He thought about all the things he could say. He could list every sacrifice humanity had made. He could remind them of every battle humans had fought on their behalf. He could point out that humans had never once attacked a council species, that every act of human violence had been in defense of others. But what would be the point? They had already made their decision. They had looked at everything humanity had done for them and decided that humans were the threat. Daniel removed his ambassador's sash slowly. It was a simple piece of cloth, blue with gold trim, but it represented a century of work, a century of humans trying to prove they belonged among the stars. He folded it neatly and placed it on the podium. "We understand," he said. That was all. 2 words. Then he turned and walked toward the exit. His footsteps echoed in the massive chamber. No one spoke. No one tried to stop him. Outside the council hall, his aide was waiting. Kevin Marsh was a young man, only 28, with red hair and freckles. His eyes were wet. "Sir, what do we do now?" Kevin asked. "We go home," Daniel said simply. "All of us." The order went out within the hour. It was not an angry command or a declaration of war. It was simply a quiet instruction, passed through proper channels. Admiral Katie Mercer received it on the bridge of her flagship, the Constellation. She was a small woman, with gray hair and sharp eyes. She had commanded human forces in space for 20 years. Under her leadership, humans had protected Council shipping lanes, defended Council colonies, and died for Council causes. She read the order twice, then nodded slowly. "Begin withdrawal procedures," she told her crew. "All ships are to return to human space. We leave nothing behind." "Admiral," her first officer said carefully, "are we really just leaving?" "Yes," Katie said, "we are." Across the galaxy, the same scene played out thousands of times. Human soldiers packed their belongings. Human doctors closed their clinics. Human engineers shut down the systems they had built and maintained. Human diplomats locked their embassies. They did not argue. They did not complain. They did not demand explanations or beg for reconsideration. They simply left. On Nexus Prime, the great station that served as the Council's capital, Councillor Seriana of the Velnoxy watched the human transports departing from the observation deck. She was young for a politician, barely 40 cycles old, and she had voted to abstain from the Containment Act. "They are really going," said Councillor Drethma, an older Velnoxy who had voted in favor. "I did not think they would actually leave." "What did you think would happen?" Seriana asked quietly. "I thought they would protest. Negotiate. Threaten. Perhaps." He waved a limb dismissively. "That is what humans do. They are emotional. They fight. They are not fighting now." "No," Drethma agreed. He sounded almost disappointed. "They are not." The last human ship departed Nexus Prime at midnight, station time. Admiral Mercer released a single statement. Broadcast on all frequencies. "Humanity wishes the Galactic Council well in its future endeavors. We bear no ill will. We simply choose to focus on our own path. May you find the peace you seek." Then the channel closed, and there was only silence. In her quarters, Serena could not sleep that night. She kept thinking about the human ambassador's face as he walked out of the council chamber. There had been no anger in his eyes. No hatred, not even sadness. There had been something worse. There had been acceptance. The look of someone who had finally stopped hoping. She wondered, in the darkness, if they had just made a terrible mistake. But outside her window, the stars were quiet, and no one answered her question. 6 months after the humans left, the galaxy began to remember why it had needed them. The first sign of trouble came from the outer rim. For decades, the Zolvani hegemony had lurked at the edges of council space, like wolves waiting outside a campfire's light. They were a warrior species, tall and scaled, with a culture built entirely on conquest. The only reason they had never attacked the council was simple. Human patrol ships guarded the border. Now those ships were gone. The Zolvani struck the Velnoxy first. 3 trading vessels disappeared in a single week. When a Velnoxy patrol went to investigate, they found nothing but wreckage and frozen bodies drifting in the void. Councillor Drethma demanded action in the council chamber. "We must send a fleet to protect our shipping lanes," he shouted, his wings beating with agitation. "The Zolvani are testing us. We must show strength." In for one, Arbiter Vorendal agreed. The problem was finding strength to show. The Council had always relied on human commanders to lead their combined fleets. Human tactical officers had trained on their homeworld in something called war colleges, institutions dedicated entirely to the study of combat. Other species found this disturbing, evidence of humanity's violent nature, but they had also found it useful when battles needed to be won. Now there were no human commanders. The Krethar volunteered to lead the defense fleet. They were large and brave, and they had many ships. What they did not have was any idea how to use them. The Battle of Varus Station lasted 4 hours. 12 Krethar vessels were destroyed. The Zolvani lost 2. The remaining council ships retreated in chaos, their commanders unable to coordinate their movements or adapt to enemy tactics. When the news reached Nexus Prime, the council chamber fell into stunned silence. "How is this possible?" asked a Sandori representative. "We outnumbered them 3-1. Numbers do not win battles," Vorendal said quietly. He was reading a report on his display, and his silver face had grown pale. "The humans tried to tell us this many times. We did not listen." Far away from the outer rim, on a peaceful Sandori colony world, a different kind of disaster was unfolding. Dr. Laura Finch had spent 5 years working on a cure for Sandori neural decay, a terrible disease that slowly destroyed the brain over many months. She had been close to a breakthrough when the withdrawal order came. Like all humans, she had packed her research and left. The Sandori Science Ministry discovered too late that human medical databases were not open files that anyone could read. They were protected by encryption systems that would take decades to break. And the physical samples Dr. Finch had been working with were gone, taken back to human space. The first major outbreak of neural decay happened 3 months after the humans left. Without the experimental treatments Dr. Finch had been developing, doctors could only watch as patients slowly lost their minds. "There must be something we can do," pleaded Minister Tovaren, head of Sandori Health Services. "Can we not contact the humans? Ask them to share their research?" "We could try," said his aide, "but they have closed their borders. No council ships are permitted to enter human space. Surely they would make an exception for a medical emergency." The aide hesitated. "Minister, we voted to call them dangerous and unstable. We voted to cage them like animals. Why would they help us now?" Tovaren had no answer. On Nexus Prime, the problems were more immediate. The Great Station had been built by a dozen species working together. But humans had done most of the maintenance for the past 50 years. They had a gift for keeping complex systems running, for finding problems before they became disasters, for fixing things that other species did not even know were broken. Chief Engineer Vossiskel discovered this the hard way when the water recycling system failed for the second time in a month. 3 million beings lived on Nexus Prime. Without clean water, they would begin dying within days. "I do not understand," Voskel muttered, staring at a tangle of pipes and filters. The human engineers made this look simple. They would come in, adjust a few things, and everything would work again. "Perhaps we should consult their maintenance logs," suggested his assistant. They tried. The logs were detailed and precise, full of technical language that no one on the station could understand. The humans had not hidden anything or sabotaged anything. They had simply taken their knowledge with them when they left. Vossiskel worked for 3 days without sleep to fix the recyclers. He succeeded, barely. But he knew it was only a temporary solution. The next failure might be one he could not repair. In the council chamber, Councillor Serena requested permission to speak. She was junior among the Velnoxy representatives, and normally, she would have stayed silent. But she could not hold her tongue any longer. "We need to talk about what is happening," she said. "The Zolvani are advancing. The Sandori are dying. This station is falling apart, and we are pretending that everything is fine." "What would you have us do?" snapped Councillor Drethma. "Beg the humans to return." "What? Aver. What would you have us do? Return? Admit that we were wrong? Were we not wrong?" The chamber erupted in angry voices. Species shouted at each other, old grudges rising to the surface. Without human diplomats to smooth tensions, the council was discovering how much they had relied on humanity's gift for finding common ground. Arbiter Vorendal struck his staff against the floor, demanding silence. When the noise finally died down, he spoke in a tired voice. "We made a decision 6 months ago. We believed it was the right decision at the time. Perhaps we were wrong. Perhaps we were not. But arguing among ourselves will not change the past." "Then what will?" Serena asked. Vorendal looked at her with ancient eyes. "I do not know. Young one, for the first time in my long life, I truly do not know." That night, Serena walked through the lower levels of Nexus Prime, areas that most council members never visited. She found herself in a corridor that had once been the human quarter, where embassy staff and military personnel had lived during their postings. The halls were empty now. The rooms had been cleaned out. But on one wall, someone had left behind a small photograph in a frame. It showed a group of human soldiers, smiling and waving at the camera. They were standing in front of a banner that read, "Happy Birthday, Lieutenant Davis." Seriana did not know who Lieutenant Davis was. She did not know if he was alive or dead, or where he was now. But looking at that photograph, she saw something that she had never really noticed before. The humans in the picture looked happy. They looked like friends. They looked like people who cared about each other, who celebrated small moments, who found joy even in difficult circumstances. They did not look like monsters. She left the photograph where it was and walked back to her quarters in silence. Behind her, the empty corridor seemed to echo with laughter that was no longer there. Somewhere in the distance, an alarm began to sound. Another system failing, another crisis beginning, and somewhere far away, beyond the borders that humanity had closed, the humans were living their lives without looking back. They were not angry. They were not plotting revenge. They were simply gone. And the council was only beginning to understand what that meant. 1 year after the humans left, Counselor Drethma stood at the edge of human space and waited for permission to speak. The journey had taken him 3 weeks. Human territory was not close to the core worlds of the council, and the route was longer now that so many systems had fallen to the Zolvani. He had traveled in a small diplomatic vessel, unarmed and alone except for a pilot and a translator. The border was marked by a line of defense stations, each one bristling with weapons. Drethma had expected human warships to be old and primitive, relics of a violent past. Instead, he saw sleek vessels with clean lines and efficient designs. They did not look threatening, they simply looked ready. A voice came through the communication system. "Velnoxy vessel, you are approaching the quarantine line. State your purpose." Drethma straightened his wings and tried to sound dignified. "I am Counselor Drethma of the Galactic Council. I request permission to enter human space and speak with your leaders." There was a long pause. Then the voice returned. "Hold your position. A representative will meet with you shortly." He waited for 6 hours. His pilot grew nervous. His translator suggested that perhaps they should leave, that the humans were making them wait as an insult. Drethma shook his head. If this was an insult, he had earned it. Finally, a small shuttle emerged from the nearest station and docked with his vessel. A single human stepped aboard. Commander Nathan Cole was not an impressive figure by human standards. He was of average height, with brown hair going gray at the temples and tired lines around his eyes. He wore a simple uniform without medals or decorations. When he sat down across from Drethma, his posture was relaxed, almost casual. "Counselor," he said politely, "I've been authorized to hear your message." Drethma had prepared a long speech. He had practiced it for days, choosing each word carefully. Now, facing this quiet human in this small room, all his prepared words seemed hollow. "We are dying," he said simply. "The Zolvani have taken 3 of our colony worlds. The Krethar have lost half their fleet. The Sandori plague has killed 500,000 people and continues to spread. Nexus Prime is falling apart. We need your help." Nathan listened without expression. When Drethma finished, he nodded slowly. "I'm sorry to hear that," he said, and he sounded like he meant it. "Then you will help us?" "No." The word hung in the air. Drethma felt his wings twitch with frustration. "We are offering to rescind the Containment Act," he said. "We will restore full rights to humanity. We will apologize publicly. We will give you whatever you want." "That's generous," Nathan said. "But the answer is still no." "Why?" The question came out louder than Drethma intended. "We are admitting we were wrong. We are asking for forgiveness." "What more do you want from us?" Nathan was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was gentle, almost sad. "Counselor, let me tell you a story. When I was young, there was a boy in my neighborhood who used to beat me up every day after school. One day, my father saw what was happening and asked me why I kept walking home the same way, knowing the boy would be there. I said I kept hoping he would stop. That if I was nice enough, patient enough, he would finally see that I wasn't his enemy. He paused. My father told me something I never forgot. He said that you can't make someone respect you by accepting their abuse. The only thing that teaches them is that you'll always be there to take more. Drethma wanted to argue. He wanted to say that this was different, that the council was not a schoolyard bully, that the situations could not be compared, but looking into Nathan's calm eyes, he could not find the words. We don't hate you, Nathan continued. We don't want revenge. We're not sitting here hoping you suffer. But we spent 100 years trying to earn your respect, and all we got was a vote to put us in chains. We're done trying to prove ourselves to people who will never see us as equals. So you will just watch us die? We will watch you face the consequences of your choices, just as we face the consequences of ours. Nathan stood up. I'm sorry, counselor. I truly am. But we can't save people who don't want to be saved. We can only save people who value what we offer. He walked to the airlock, then paused. Safe travels home. I hope, for your sake, that you find another solution. Then he was gone. Drethma sat alone in the small room for a long time. His translator tried to speak to him several times, but he waved her away. He was thinking about everything he had ever believed about humans. He had always thought of them as useful tools. Strong and capable, yes. But ultimately simple creatures driven by emotion rather than logic. He had assumed that their helpfulness came from weakness, from a desperate need to be accepted. Now he wondered if he had been wrong about everything. Back on Earth, the Human Senate was holding its weekly session. Captain Scott Palmer stood before the assembled representatives, giving his regular briefing on galactic affairs. The Zolvani have taken 2 more systems this week, he reported. At their current rate of advance, they will reach the Velnoxy homeworld within 18 months. The Council's combined fleet has been reduced to roughly 40% of its original strength. Senator Maria Valdez raised her hand. What about the Sandori plague? Dr. Finch has completed her cure, Scott said. It's been tested and proven effective. It's sitting in a secure database, ready for distribution, and we're not sending it to them? No, Senator. That decision is above my pay grade, but as far as I know, the policy remains unchanged. We do not interfere in council affairs. Maria nodded slowly. She was an older woman, with white hair and a face that had seen many hard decisions. Before becoming a senator, she had served as a military commander during the last major conflict with the Zolvani, 20 years ago. I want to be clear about something, she said, addressing the full Senate. We are not doing this out of spite. We are not punishing them for hurting our feelings. We are doing this because helping people who despise us only teaches them that they can despise us without consequence. She looked around the chamber. They called us monsters when we fought their wars. They called us unstable when we showed emotion. They called us dangerous when we defended the weak. Now they can see what kind of monsters we really were. We were the only thing standing between them and the dark, and they threw us away. The Senate was silent. One day, Maria continued, they may learn to value what we offered. When that day comes, perhaps we can talk about reconciliation. But until then, we focus on our own people, our own worlds, our own future. Is there any objection? There was none. On the long journey back to council space, Counselor Drethma could not stop thinking about Nathan Cole's story. The boy who kept walking home the same way, hoping the bully would change. The father's wisdom about respect and abuse. He thought about all the times humans had helped the council. All the times they had been thanked with suspicion and fear. All the times they had kept coming back, kept trying, kept hoping, and then, one day, they had stopped. Not with anger, not with threats, not with violence. They had simply stopped walking into the fists that kept hitting them, and now the fists had nothing to strike but empty air. Drethma looked out the window at the stars streaming past and felt something he had never felt before. Shame. 3 years after the humans left, the Velnoxy homeworld burned. Counselor Serena stood on the observation deck of a refugee ship, watching her world shrink in the distance. Behind her, Thousands of her people crowded into spaces meant for hundreds. Children cried for parents they would never see again. Elders sat in stunned silence, unable to accept that everything they knew was gone. The Zolvani had broken through the final defense line 2 days ago. The Velnoxy fleet, what remained of it, had fought bravely, but bravery was not enough against an enemy that had spent centuries perfecting the art of war. The last transmission from the Planetary Defense Command had been a single word, repeated over and over. Run. So they ran. Serena had helped organize the evacuation. She had pushed terrified families onto overcrowded ships. She had made impossible choices about who could be saved and who would be left behind. She had watched her city disappear under Zolvani bombardment, ancient buildings that had stood for 10,000 years reduced to rubble in minutes. Now she stood at a window and watched her world grow smaller, and she felt nothing at all. The grief was too large to feel. It would come later. She knew. For now, there was only emptiness. A voice spoke behind her. "Counselor, we need to discuss our destination." She turned to find Captain Veltos, commander of what was now the Velnoxy refugee fleet. He was young, too young for the weight he carried. 3 days ago, he had been a junior officer. Now, with most of the senior commanders dead, he was in charge of saving what remained of his species. "Where can we go?" Serena asked. "The council is scattered. Nexus Prime has fallen. The Krethar are fighting for their own survival." Veltos hesitated. "There is one option. The humans are accepting refugees." Serena felt something stir in her chest. Hope, perhaps. Or maybe just desperation wearing a mask. They would take us? They are taking everyone who asks. The Morvani, the Seleth, even some Krethar civilians. They are giving them worlds on the outer edges of human space. Food, shelter, medical care. He paused. They are not making them citizens. They are not offering membership in their society. But they are keeping them alive. Why would they do that? I do not know. Perhaps they still feel some obligation to the species they once protected. Perhaps they simply cannot watch people die when they have the power to save them. Veltos looked at her with tired eyes. Does the reason matter? Well, Serena thought about that. 3 years ago, she had abstained from the vote on the Human Containment Act. She had been the only one. At the time, her colleagues had mocked her caution. Now, most of those colleagues were dead. Set course for human space, she said. On Nexus Prime, the great station drifted cold and dark. Arbiter Vorendal was one of the few beings still aboard. Most of the population had fled when the power grid finally collapsed for good. Those who remained were mostly those too old or too sick to leave. Vorendal walked through empty corridors that had once been filled with the sounds of 1,000 species. His footsteps echoed in the silence. Emergency lights cast weak shadows on walls that were already gathering dust. He made his way to the historical archive, a room he had avoided for 3 years. Now, with nothing left to lose, he finally found the courage to face it. The archive still had power. Its own backup generators had been installed by human engineers, designed to last for centuries. Vorendal sat at a terminal and began to search. He found footage of the asteroid crisis, when human ships had saved the Velnoxy homeworld. He watched a young human captain give orders calmly as debris struck his vessel, killing half his crew. The captain never stopped working until the last piece of the asteroid was destroyed. He found records of the Krethar plague, when human doctors had worked themselves to exhaustion, treating patients who looked at them with disgust. He saw Dr. Helen Morris coughing blood, refusing to leave her post even as the disease killed her. He found diplomatic transcripts from the Sandori Civil War, when human mediators had spent months shuttling between factions that wanted to kill each other. He read the private notes of Ambassador Ruth Campbell, who had written that she sometimes cried herself to sleep, wondering if peace was even possible. He found a speech from 30 years ago, given by Admiral Greg Lawson, at a ceremony honoring humans who had died in council service. The admiral stood at a podium, his uniform decorated with medals earned in battles fought for people who had never thanked him. "We don't ask for gratitude," Lawson had said. We understand that we are newcomers to this galaxy. We know that our ways seem strange, our emotions excessive, our methods too direct. We accept that we must prove ourselves, again and again, before we can truly belong. Vorendal watched the old human pause, looking out at an audience of alien faces. We only ask that you remember we are your friends. We are here because we believe in something larger than ourselves. We are here because we think the galaxy is better when species work together instead of apart. We are here because we hope. The recording ended. Vorendal sat in the darkness, tears streaming down his silver face. They had hoped, that was all. They had hoped that if they kept trying, kept sacrificing, kept giving, eventually the galaxy would see them as friends instead of threats, and the galaxy had answered that hope with chains. Vorendal activated the broadcast system. His voice went out on all frequencies, traveling at the speed of light toward every corner of the galaxy, including the quiet borders of human space. This is Arbiter Vorendal, last representative of the Galactic Council. I speak these words knowing they may be my final message. He paused, gathering his thoughts. To the humans who once called us friends, we were fools. We took your kindness for weakness. We mistook your patience for submission. We saw your willingness to help as proof that you needed our approval. We were wrong about all of it. He looked at the frozen image of Admiral Lawson on the screen. You were never our servants. You were our shield. You stood between us and the darkness, asking nothing in return except to be treated with basic dignity. We could not even give you that. His voice broke slightly. I do not ask for forgiveness. I do not ask for rescue. I only ask that you remember us, not as we were in our arrogance, but as we should have been. Remember that some of us understood, too late, what you truly meant to us. He reached for the controls to end the broadcast. To Counselor Serena, wherever you are. You were right. You were always right. I am sorry I did not listen. The transmission ended. Vorendal sat alone in the archive, surrounded by records of a century of human sacrifice. The station groaned around him as another system failed somewhere in the darkness. He did not move to fix it. There was nothing left to fix. Far away, on a refugee ship approaching human space, Serena heard the broadcast through the communications system. She listened to every word, and when it was over, she closed her eyes. I forgive you, she whispered to the empty air. I forgive all of us. But forgiveness could not bring back the dead. It could not restore the fallen worlds. It could not undo the chains they had tried to place on the only species that had ever truly wanted to help them. All forgiveness could do was acknowledge the truth, and the truth was simple. They had been given everything, and they had thrown it away. Now there was nothing left but consequences. 5 years after the humans left, the galaxy was silent. The Galactic Council no longer existed. Its member species were scattered, conquered, or dead. The Zolvani hegemony controlled most of known space. But their empire was already rotting from within. They were warriors, not builders. They knew how to destroy, not how to create. The worlds they conquered fell into poverty and chaos. On Nexus Prime, the great station drifted in darkness. Its corridors were empty. Its systems were dead. Only one thing still functioned. A single message, playing on a loop, broadcast by Arbiter Vorendal before he died. Let this station stand as a monument to our arrogance. The humans did not destroy us. We destroyed ourselves. They simply stopped saving us from our own folly. The message played into the void, heard by no one. But beyond the ruins of Council space, behind the quarantine line that humanity had established, the story was very different. Admiral Derek Santos stood on the bridge of the exploration vessel Horizon and looked out at stars no one had ever seen before. Behind him, a fleet of 12 ships waited for his command. Scientists, engineers, diplomats, soldiers. All of them volunteers. All of them looking for new frontiers. Jump coordinates confirmed, Admiral, his navigator reported. We are ready to proceed into unexplored space. Derek nodded slowly. He was 45 years old, with dark skin and gray temples. He had spent the first half of his career fighting other people's wars. Now he was leading humanity's first true exploration mission in decades. "What do you think we'll find out there?" asked his first officer, a young woman named Christine Park. "I don't know," Derek said honestly. "Maybe nothing. Maybe other species, new civilizations, new problems." He smiled slightly. "Maybe friends." "Friends," Christine repeated. "That's optimistic. We've always been optimistic. That was our mistake with the Council. We kept hoping they would learn to see us as partners instead of tools." He paused. "Maybe out there, we'll find someone who can see us clearly from the start." He gave the order, and the fleet jumped into the unknown. Back on Earth, a memorial was being dedicated. It stood in a park in the city of Chicago, a simple wall of black stone with names carved into its surface. Thousands of names. Humans who had died in service to the Galactic Council over the past century. Soldiers and doctors and engineers and diplomats, young and old, famous and forgotten. Ambassador Daniel Carter stood at the podium, looking out at the crowd. He was 73 now, his hair white and his face lined with age. He had retired from public service after the withdrawal, but he had been asked to speak at this dedication, and he could not refuse. "I knew many of the people whose names are on this wall," he began. "I served with some of them. I buried others. Each one of them believed in something bigger than themselves. Each one of them died, hoping that their sacrifice would mean something." He paused, looking at the stone. "For a long time, I thought their sacrifices had been wasted. We gave everything we had, and we were rewarded with suspicion and contempt. It would be easy to say that all those deaths were for nothing." He shook his head slowly. "But I don't believe that anymore. I believe that every act of kindness matters, even if it isn't appreciated. I believe that every sacrifice has value, even if no one says thank you. I believe that what we did for the galaxy was not about them at all. It was about us. It was about who we wanted to be." He looked up at the crowd. "We didn't leave because we hated them. We left because we finally loved ourselves enough to stop begging for respect we had already earned. History will remember the silence with which we walked away, but let history also remember why. Let it remember that we tried, that we cared, that for 100 years, we offered our hands in friendship to anyone who would take them." He stepped back from the podium. "And let history remember this. We would do it all again. Not for gratitude, not for reward, but because helping others is who we are." The Council could not understand that. Perhaps someday, someone will. In the crowd, a woman stood quietly, listening. Dr. Laura Finch was 60 now, her brown hair streaked with gray. She had completed the cure for Sandori neural decay years ago. It still sat in a secure database, tested and proven, ready for distribution. Sometimes, late at night, she thought about sending it. The Sandori were dying. The cure could save them. Every day she waited. More lives were lost. But every time she reached for the controls, she remembered something. She remembered the Sandori Health Ministry official who had told her that human doctors could not be trusted with Sandori patients. She remembered the council member who had suggested that human medical research should be monitored for safety concerns. She remembered the vote that had called her species unstable and dangerous. The cure would wait. Maybe forever. Maybe until someone asked for it. Until someone earned it. She walked away from the memorial without speaking to anyone. On the outer edges of human space, the refugee worlds were thriving. Counselor Serena had been living on New Haven for 2 years now. It was a beautiful world, green and peaceful, with oceans that sparkled under a warm yellow sun. The humans had given it to the Velnoxy refugees, without asking for anything in return. Serena spent her days teaching young Velnoxy about their history, not the official history, with its convenient lies and comfortable myths. The real history, the history of human sacrifice and alien ingratitude. The history of kindness rejected and trust betrayed. Some of her students asked why the humans still help them, even after everything. "Because they are better than we were," she answered honestly. "Because they can look at suffering and feel moved to help. even when the suffering people have hurt them. We called that weakness. We were wrong. It is the greatest strength in the galaxy. On a colony ship bound for the outer territories, a little girl sat with her father, looking out at the stars. Her name was Emma. She was 7 years old, with dark hair and curious eyes. Her father, Tim Bradley, had served in the old days, when humanity still answered the Council's calls for help. He had scars from battles fought for species who had never thanked him. "Daddy," Emma said, "did we really used to help the aliens?" Tim was quiet for a moment. He thought about all the things he could say. He could tell her about the friends he had lost, the worlds he had seen, the gratitude that never came. "We did, sweetheart," he said finally. "We helped them for a long time. Why did we stop? Because they asked us to." He put his arm around her. "They didn't want our help anymore. So we left." "Were you sad?" Tim considered the question. "At first, yes. Very sad. We had worked so hard to make friends, and it felt like we had failed. But then I realized something." "What?" "We didn't fail. We did everything we could. We were good and kind and brave. The failure wasn't ours. It was theirs. They couldn't see what we were offering them. And you can't force someone to see something they don't want to see." Emma thought about this. "So what do we do now?" Tim looked out at the stars stretching before them. Somewhere, out there, beyond everything they knew, new possibilities waited. "Now we find new friends," he said. "Better friends. People who will see us for who we really are." "And who are we, Daddy?" Tim smiled. "We're humans, sweetheart. We're people who help. It's what we do. And someday, we'll find someone who understands what that means." The ship sailed on, carrying them toward the unknown. Behind them, the ruins of Council space drifted in silence. Conquered worlds and empty stations, and monuments to arrogance. The ghosts of a civilization that had been given everything and thrown it all away, and somewhere in that silence, a message still played. Vorendal's final words, echoing through the void. They simply stopped saving us from our own folly. The galaxy had asked for silence, and silence was what it received. But beyond the quarantine line, humanity was not silent. Humanity was laughing and crying and loving and hoping. Humanity was exploring new frontiers and building new dreams. Humanity was doing what it had always done, looking for friends, offering hands, believing that tomorrow could be better than today. They had learned a painful lesson about the cost of kindness. They had discovered that some gifts are never valued until they are gone. But they had not stopped being kind. That was the truth the Council never understood. You could reject humanity. You could insult them and fear them and try to cage them. You could throw away their friendship and mock their sacrifices, but you could never make them stop caring. You could only make them care about someone else. And in the end, that was the price the Council paid. Not war, not revenge, not destruction, just absence. Just silence. Just the cold realization that the warmth they had taken for granted would never return. The humans had walked away, and the galaxy had learned, too late, what that silence truly cost.